I woke up that morning still smelling like vanilla and butter, my hands raw from kneading dough since 4 a.m. The kitchen was a mess of flour and hope, every surface dusted white like first snow. Lucas was still asleep in the next room, his small chest rising and falling in the dim light filtering through our cracked window. I could hear the neighbor's dog barking, the distant rumble of morning traffic beginning its daily symphony. I had 50 cupcakes to sell before noon, 50 chances to get closer to the surgery that could give my son his sight. But when I walked into the living room, with a tray balanced on my hip, Ricardo looked at me like I was dirt on his shoe. "You're going out like that again?" he said, not even glancing up from his phone. The blue light made his face look cold, unfamiliar, selling sweets on buses like some beggar. I didn't answer. What could I say? That this beggar was the only one paying bills? That while he sat at home complaining about his failed business ventures, scrolling through job postings he'd never apply to, I was out there fighting for our child's future? I just grabbed my bag, the worn leather strap familiar against my shoulder, and left, the door closing behind me with a hollow click that seemed to echo in my chest, in the empty spaces where love used to live. My name is Clara, and I've never been the kind of woman who demands attention. I'm plain, tired most days, with hands that show every year of hard work, calluses on my palms, flour permanently embedded under my nails. My hair is always tied back in a practical bun, and I own exactly 3 pairs of jeans, all of them stained with batter at some point. But I know how to bake. My mother taught me before she died, and those recipes became my lifeline when everything else fell apart. Lucas was born with a rare condition, retinal dystrophy, the doctors called it. Like giving it a fancy name made it less cruel. They said surgery could restore his vision, but the cost was astronomical. $20,000. It might as well have been 20 million. Ricardo had promised we'd figure it out together, sitting in that hospital room 10 years ago, holding my hand while I held our newborn son. But promises are cheap when you're married to a man whose pride is bigger than his paycheck. He used to be different, or maybe I just wanted to believe he was. When we met, he was charming, full of dreams about the business he'd start, the life we'd build. But dreams without action are just wishes, and wishes don't pay medical bills. Either way, the man I married disappeared somewhere between his 3rd failed startup and his growing resentment of me, of Lucas, of the life we had instead of the life he'd imagined. I started small, baking at night after Lucas went to bed, the kitchen my sanctuary and my prison. I'd mix and fold and pipe until my arms ached, until the sun started threatening the horizon. Then I'd sleep for 2 hours, wake up, get Lucas ready for his special school, and head out to sell. Bus routes became my territory, my battlefield. I'd board with my insulated bag, offering samples with a smile that felt more real than anything else in my life, making conversation with strangers who sometimes became friends. Some people bought out of pity. I could see it in their eyes, that soft, sad look that said, "Poor thing." Others bought because the cupcakes were genuinely good, because vanilla bean and dark chocolate don't lie, because you can taste love when it's baked into something. I didn't care about their reasons. Every coin, every crumpled bill, brought me closer to Lucas seeing his first sunrise, his first rainbow, my face. The other vendors knew me. Maria, who sold homemade jewelry with hands that moved like birds, would save me a seat on the bus. "You're glowing today, Clara," she'd say, even when I knew I looked exhausted, even when I could feel the weight of sleepless nights pulling at my face. Those small kindnesses kept me going when Ricardo's words tried to break me, when the world felt too heavy to carry alone. "You're embarrassing me," he'd said just last week, standing in our kitchen while I packaged cupcakes at midnight. The light above the sink flickered. It had been broken for months, and he'd never fixed it. "My friends ask what my wife does, and I have to tell them you're a street vendor. Or, I'm trying to save our son's sight," I'd replied, my voice shaking with exhaustion and something that might have been the beginning of anger, by humiliating us both. He'd walked away then, his footsteps heavy on the old wooden floor, leaving me standing in our small kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of my desperation, mixing bowls, piping bags, the sweet smell of hope baking at 350 degrees. I'd stood there for a long time that night, just breathing, just being. And I'd realized something. I wasn't embarrassed. Not of the work, not of the hustle, not of the fact that I was fighting when he'd given up. The only thing I was embarrassed about was that I'd stayed this long with someone who couldn't see my strength. The turning point came on a Wednesday in March, one of those days where spring couldn't decide if it was coming or going. I was on the number 47 bus, my usual route, when a young woman with bright red lipstick and a camera asked if she could photograph my cupcakes for her food blog. I almost said no. I was nobody, just a woman with a dream and a worn-out cooler bag held together with duct tape and determination. My cupcakes were arranged on a simple tray. Nothing fancy. No Instagram-worthy presentation. But something made me agree. Maybe the way she smiled. Maybe the fact that she looked at my desserts like they were art. "These are incredible," she said, tasting a chocolate raspberry cupcake, her eyes closing in genuine pleasure. "You should be selling these online. Seriously, this is restaurant quality. Online." The word felt foreign, like a language I'd never learned to speak. I barely knew how to use my phone beyond calls and messages. Social media was something other people did, younger people with better lives and prettier kitchens. But she showed me how to set up a page right there on the bus, the vehicle swaying around curves while her fingers flew over the screen, her enthusiasm infectious. "Tell your story," she said. "People connect with stories. They'll come for the cupcakes, but they'll stay for you." The post went up that evening. I'd written something simple, honest. "My name is Clara. I bake to give my son his sight. Every cupcake is a prayer. Every order brings us closer to a miracle. Thank you for being part of our journey." By morning, I had 50 orders. By the end of the week, 200. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages, comments, shares. People loved the story as much as the cupcakes. A mother fighting for her son, baking with love in every layer, refusing to give up even when the world said it was impossible. I didn't tell them about Ricardo. That part felt too raw, too shameful, like admitting I'd failed at something important. The orders grew so fast I could barely keep up. I baked 18 hours a day, my back screaming, my eyes burning from exhaustion and flour dust, and the sheer overwhelming reality of sudden success. Our small kitchen became a factory. Every surface covered with cooling racks and buttercream and orders written on sticky notes that threatened to slide off the refrigerator. Lucas would sit in the kitchen with me, listening to the sound of the mixer, the oven timer, my tired humming. He'd ask what color the frosting was, and I'd describe it like painting pictures in his mind. Blue like the sky on the clearest day, I'd tell him, piping swirls onto vanilla cupcakes. Red like strawberries fresh from the garden, yellow like sunshine breaking through clouds after rain. "I can't wait to see it all, Mom," he'd say, his small hands reaching out to feel the piping bag, to be part of this journey however he could. And I'd have to turn away, so he wouldn't hear me cry, wouldn't sense the overwhelming mix of hope and fear that came with getting this close to something you've wanted for so long. With the increased income, I approached a bank for a small business loan. It felt presumptuous, almost foolish. Me, a woman who'd been selling cupcakes on buses just months before, walking into a polished office asking for money. The manager, a stern-faced woman with perfect nails and a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, looked skeptical when I walked in wearing my flour-dusted jeans and tired smile, but the numbers didn't lie. I had orders, income statements printed on cheap paper, but showing real growth, and a rapidly growing customer base that believed in what I was building. I'd brought my phone, showing her the comments, the messages, the people tagging friends and sharing posts. She'd leaned back in her leather chair, studying me like I was a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. "Most people who come in here," she'd said finally, "have business degrees, market research, 5-year plans in binders. You have cupcakes and a dream, and a son who deserves to see," I'd added quietly. She'd approved me for $12,000, enough to buy a used van, commercial baking equipment, and legitimize what had started as desperation into an actual business. I'd walked out of that bank feeling like I was floating, like maybe the universe had finally decided to stop testing me and start helping instead. Ricardo watched this transformation with growing discomfort. He'd come home, though it felt less like home and more like a place we both happened to sleep, to find me packaging orders, checking my phone for messages, planning deliveries with the efficiency that came from necessity. The house smelled like a bakery, sweet and warm, and I was too busy to notice his sulking, too focused to care about his moods. "You think you're special now," he said one night, appearing in the kitchen doorway like a ghost of the man I'd once loved. His voice dripped with something that might have been fear, disguised as contempt. Making fancy cakes, driving around in that van with your business name on it. You're still just what? I interrupted, surprising both of us. I set down my piping bag, turned to face him fully for the first time in months. Just your wife? Just Lucas's mother? Just someone trying to do what you never could. Actually provide for this family. The kitchen was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the oven cooling down. He opened his mouth, closed it again. We stood there in the fluorescent light, two people who'd once promised forever, discovering that sometimes forever has an expiration date. He didn't have an answer. He just grabbed his jacket from the hook by the door and left, his car peeling out of the driveway with an angry screech of tires. I heard it fade into the distance and I felt nothing. No sadness, no relief, just a strange emptiness where emotion used to live. The woman he'd married years ago would have cried, would have apologized, would have made it her fault somehow, would have chased after him begging him to understand. But that woman was baking herself into someone new, one cupcake at a time, one small victory building on another until she barely recognized her own reflection. The breakthrough came from an unexpected place. A hotel manager named Patricia, elegant in her 50s with silver hair and sharp eyes, tasted my desserts at a local market where I'd rented a booth for the weekend. I'd invested in better packaging by then, displayed my cupcakes on tiered stands I'd found at a thrift store and painted white. She'd taken one bite of my lemon lavender cupcake and closed her eyes. "Where did you learn to bake like this?" she'd asked. "My mother," I'd said simply. "She said every recipe needs 3 things: good ingredients, patient hands, and love. The love is the most important part." She'd smiled at that, a real smile that reached her eyes. Then she'd handed me her card, the thick, expensive kind that announced importance before you even read the words. "We're looking for a supplier for our chain, 5 hotels across the state. Would you be interested in submitting a proposal?" My hands shook holding that card. This was it. The door I'd been knocking on for months, finally opening. This was the difference between surviving and thriving, between scraping by and actually building something that could last. I worked for 3 days straight on that proposal, perfecting recipes, calculating costs down to the penny, designing presentation samples that would show I understood their market. I researched their hotels, their clientele, what kind of desserts would complement their restaurants and room service. When I walked into that hotel's corporate office downtown, glass and steel and polished floors that clicked under my heels, I wasn't the tired woman selling cupcakes on buses anymore. I was a businesswoman with a product worth their investment, with a story worth telling, with a determination that had been forged in pre-dawn kitchens and tested by every obstacle life could throw at me. They gave me the contract on the spot. Patricia shook my hand and said, "I've been in this business 30 years. I can always tell when someone has that special something. You have it, Clara. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." I'd cried in my van in the parking garage afterward, big, ugly sobs of relief and joy, and the overwhelming realization that we were going to make it. Lucas was going to see. I was going to survive. We were going to be okay. The morning I signed the hotel deal, making it official with signatures and lawyers and terms I barely understood, but trusted were fair, I came home to find Ricardo packing a bag. Not his own, mine. He'd pulled my suitcase from the closet, was throwing clothes into it with angry, jerky movements. "What are you doing?" I asked, setting down my portfolio, my body suddenly cold despite the warm afternoon. "You need to leave," he said, not meeting my eyes, his jaw tight. "This isn't working anymore. You're never here, you're always busy with your business. And Lucas needs stability. He needs a mother who's present, not someone running around playing entrepreneur." I stared at him. This man I'd loved. This father who'd done nothing while I fought for our son's future, who'd sat in comfort while I built empires from crumbs. And suddenly I saw him clearly, not through the lens of obligation or history or the memory of who we'd been, but as he actually was. Not as my husband, but as a stranger who'd been living in my house, feeding off my hope while contributing nothing but criticism and contempt. "Lucas needs his mother," I said quietly, my voice steady in a way it hadn't been in years. "And his mother needs to finish what she started. So no, Ricardo, I'm not leaving. But you should." Something flickered across his face. Shock, maybe, or the first hint of realization that he'd pushed too far. that he'd miscalculated the balance of power. "You can't just—" "I can." My voice was steel now, forged in all those early mornings, all those rejections, all those moments when I'd wanted to quit but couldn't, because Lucas was counting on me. "I've been doing everything alone anyway. The only difference is, now I won't have to listen to you tell me I'm not good enough while I do it. Now I won't have to pretend your opinion matters when you've never supported a single thing I've tried to build." He stood there with my clothes in his hands, looking lost. "Clara, You what? You're sorry? You didn't mean it?" I took the suitcase from him, started unpacking what he'd thrown together. "Save it. I'm done accepting apologies from people who don't change. I'm done making myself smaller so you can feel bigger." He left that night. No fight, no drama. Just a man who'd gambled that I'd always need him more than he needed me, finally learning he'd bet wrong. He took his clothes, his laptop, his pride, and walked out of the house we'd shared for 12 years. I watched from the window as he loaded his car, and I felt nothing but a strange lightness, like I'd been carrying a weight I didn't know was there until it was gone. Lucas came out of his room, sensing the change in the air. "Is Dad leaving?" "Yes, baby." "Is it because of me? Because of the surgery?" I knelt down, took his hands in mine. "No, sweetheart. It's because sometimes people grow in different directions. And that's okay. It doesn't mean anyone did anything wrong. It just means the story changed, and not everyone wants to read the same book anymore." He was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, "Will we be okay?" "We're going to be better than okay," I promised him. "We're going to be extraordinary." The months that followed were a blur of expansion and growth. I rented a commercial kitchen in an industrial park, a space that smelled like possibility and fresh paint. I hired 3 employees: Maria from the bus, a young pastry chef named Daniel who just graduated culinary school, and an older woman named Ruth who decorated cakes like she was creating magic. We worked together, building something that felt less like a business and more like a family. My little operation became Clara's Confections, with a logo designed by Lucas's art teacher, a lease that made me nervous every time I signed the check, and business cards that felt surreal in my hands. I'd stand in that commercial kitchen sometimes, watching my team work, smelling the sugar and butter and hope, and wonder how I'd gotten here. How the woman who'd sold cupcakes on buses had become the woman who employed people, who had contracts and accounts, and a future that looked nothing like her past. Lucas's surgery was scheduled for spring, a Tuesday morning in April when the world was blooming and everything felt possible. I'd saved enough, finally, after 2 years of pre-dawn baking and late-night deliveries, and sacrificing everything that wasn't essential. The hospital required payment up front, $20,000 that I'd earned 1 cupcake at a time. I'd done it. We'd done it. The night before his operation, I sat beside his bed like I had when he was little, holding his hand in the darkness. "Tomorrow," I whispered, "you're going to see everything. The colors we talked about, the faces you've only felt, the world that's been waiting for you. Will you be there when I wake up?" he asked, his voice small and scared and hopeful all at once. "Always," I promised. "I'll be the first thing you see. I'll be there when you open your eyes, and I'll be there every moment after." "Mom?" "Yes, baby. Thank you for not giving up." I broke a little then, in the darkness of his room, surrounded by the familiar sounds of our home. "Thank you for being worth fighting for." The surgery took 6 hours. I sat in that waiting room, surrounded by other anxious families, fluorescent lights humming overhead, bad coffee growing cold in a styrofoam cup. I prayed to whatever was listening, God, the universe, my mother's memory, not for success. I'd learned hope was something you built with your own hands, not something you waited for the sky to deliver, but for strength to face whatever came next, whether it was joy or heartbreak or something in between. I thought about all the moments that had led here. The first cupcake I'd sold, the woman who'd cried because it reminded her of her grandmother's baking, the man who'd bought 2 dozen for his daughter's birthday, Maria saving me a seat on the bus, Patricia believing in me when I barely believed in myself. Every small kindness, every tiny victory, every moment when I'd wanted to quit, but chose to keep going instead. When the doctor emerged, still in his scrubs, I stood up so fast my vision went spotty. He was smiling. "The surgery went perfectly," he said. "Better than we could have hoped. Clara, your son is going to see." I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, could only nod as tears streamed down my face, as the other families in the waiting room smiled at my joy. as the world suddenly seemed brighter than it had any right to be. His first sight was my face. The bandages came off slowly, carefully, the doctor's hands gentle as he unwrapped layer after layer. Lucas's eyes, those eyes that had been closed to the world for 10 years, that had never seen a sunset or a smile or the color of his mother's hair, opened slowly, adjusting to light for the first time. He blinked, focused, and then he smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. "Mom," he said, reaching up with trembling hands to touch my cheek, to trace the lines of my face like he was memorizing a map. "You're beautiful. You're so beautiful." I broke then, in that hospital room, surrounded by beeping machines and sterile walls and the smell of antiseptic and hope. I broke and put myself back together in the same moment, because that's what you do when your child sees you for the first time, when everything you fought for comes true, when the world finally decides to give you the miracle you've been earning. Ricardo showed up 3 months later on a Saturday afternoon when I was closing the shop. My actual shop. My storefront with its glass windows and hanging sign, and the line of customers that sometimes stretched around the block. He looked thinner, older, like someone who'd been carrying weight they couldn't put down, like someone who'd finally understood what they'd lost. "Clara," he said, standing in the doorway of my bakery, backlit by the late afternoon sun. "I need to talk to you." I wiped my hands on my apron, suddenly exhausted. It had been a long day, a wedding order, a corporate event, the regular Saturday rush. "What do you want, Ricardo?" I was wrong. His voice cracked, and I could see he'd been practicing this, rehearsing what to say. "About everything. About you. About what you were trying to do. About who I thought you were versus who you actually are. I was jealous and stupid and scared, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Clara." I looked at this man I'd once loved. This man who'd made me feel small when I was building something big, who'd torn me down when I needed to be lifted up. Part of me wanted to be cruel, to throw his words back in his face, to make him hurt the way he'd hurt me. But cruelty takes energy I didn't have anymore, and revenge never tasted as sweet as people claimed. "I forgive you," I said simply, the words surprising us both. He looked up, hope lighting his features like sunrise. "Does that mean—" "It means I forgive you," I repeated, my voice gentle but firm. "Not that I'll forget. Not that we're going back. Not that any of this gets erased like it never happened. It means I'm letting go of the anger, because holding on to it only hurts me, only keeps me chained to a past I've outgrown. But we're done, Ricardo. We were done the moment you tried to make me choose between you and our son's future. Clara, please." "Lucas saw his first sunset last week," I interrupted, needing him to understand what he'd missed, what he'd given up. "We drove to the beach, and he cried because he said it was more beautiful than anything he'd imagined. He said the ocean was bluer than my descriptions, that the sky looked like it was on fire, that he finally understood why people write poems about simple things. And you know what? You weren't there. You weren't there for any of it. Not the struggle, not the victory, not the moment our son opened his eyes and saw the world for the first time. You don't get to walk back in now that the hard part is over and claim credit for a journey you refused to take." The shop was quiet, except for the hum of refrigerators, the distant sound of traffic outside. Dust motes floated in the slanted afternoon light, and I could smell the lingering sweetness of the day's baking, vanilla and chocolate, and the caramel I'd burned slightly that morning. He stood there, and I watched him understand what he'd lost. Not just me, but the chance to be part of something meaningful, something real, the chance to be a father who showed up, a husband who supported instead of tore down, the chance to be the kind of man who could look back on his life with pride instead of regret. "I really am sorry," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know," I said. "And I really have moved on. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for, Ricardo. I hope you learn to be happy with yourself, because that's something I can't give you. That's something nobody can give you except yourself." He nodded, understanding that this was goodbye. Not angry, not bitter, just final. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "He's lucky to have you." "I'm lucky to have him," I corrected. "That's the difference between us. You always saw parenthood as sacrifice. I saw it as privilege." He left. I locked up the shop, turned off the lights one by one, watching the display cases fade into shadow. I drove home through the city I'd once navigated blind with hope, past the bus stops where I'd started, past the streets where I'd sold my first cupcakes to strangers who became believers. Lucas was waiting at home, probably reading one of the dozens of books he'd devoured since the surgery. Fantasy novels where he could finally see the covers, history books with photographs he could finally understand, my son who could see, my business that was thriving, my life that I'd rebuilt from scratch using nothing but determination and flour, and the stubborn refusal to give up. I thought about forgiveness as I drove, watching the streetlights flicker on like stars coming out. Forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's not a door you open to let them back in. It's a weight you set down so you can walk forward lighter, so you can move through the world without constantly looking back at what hurt you. It's understanding that some people are chapters, not the whole story. And that's okay. That's more than okay. That's necessary. Ricardo taught me what I didn't want. He taught me that I was strong enough to stand alone, capable enough to build empires from nothing, brave enough to bet on myself when no one else would. And in his absence, I learned that sometimes the person who saves you is yourself. You just have to be brave enough to start, stubborn enough to continue, and wise enough to know when to stop accepting less than you deserve. Lucas is 12 now, nearly 13, and he wants to be a photographer. He sees the world in ways I never imagined, finding beauty in ordinary things, because nothing is ordinary when you've lived in darkness and emerged into light. He photographs my cupcakes sometimes, making art out of sugar and cream, capturing the swirl of buttercream and golden hour light. I think about how far we've come every time I see him behind that camera, his eye pressed to the viewfinder, seeing possibilities I never could have dreamed. Clara's Confections has 3 locations now. The original, a downtown shop near the business district, and a small cafe in the neighborhood where I used to ride those buses. I employ 23 people, many of them women with their own stories, their own fights. Single mothers, immigrants starting over, women escaping bad situations, people who just needed someone to believe in them the way Patricia believed in me. We're building something together, not just a business, but proof that you can start with nothing and create everything. Proof that the world will tell you no 1,000 times, but you only need one yes if you're brave enough to keep asking. Proof that kindness and strength aren't opposites. They're partners, dancing together in the kitchen at 4 a.m., turning flour into futures. Maria runs the downtown location now, her jewelry-making skills translating perfectly to decorating cakes. Daniel is my head pastry chef, creating desserts that regularly get written up in food blogs. Ruth trains all the new hires, teaching them that baking is muscle memory and heart work combined. We're a family built on sugar and second chances, and I'm prouder of this than anything else I've ever done. Sometimes late at night, when I'm alone in the original shop with my thoughts, and the quiet hum of refrigerators and the ghost of everything I used to be, I think about the woman I was. The one who apologized for taking up space, who believed she needed someone else to make her complete, who thought her worth was measured by someone else's opinion. And I'm grateful to her, because her struggle became my strength, her pain became my purpose, her desperation became my determination. This isn't a story about revenge or triumph over an enemy, about proving someone wrong or rubbing success in their face. Ricardo wasn't a villain in some fairy tale. He was just a man who couldn't grow when growth was needed, who couldn't support when support was required, who couldn't see past his own limitations to help someone else reach for the sky. And I wasn't a victim. I was a woman learning that sometimes love means loving yourself enough to walk away, strong enough to start over, brave enough to bet everything on a dream that everyone said was impossible. If you're reading this, maybe you're fighting your own battle. Maybe someone is telling you that your dreams are too small, or too big, or too impossible to even attempt. Maybe you're wondering if you have what it takes to start over, to stand up, to say enough, to situations that have been breaking you slowly for years. Maybe you're selling cupcakes on buses, literally or metaphorically, wondering if anyone will ever see your worth. You do. I know you do, because I did. And I was nobody special. Just a mother who loved her son, a baker who knew how to turn flour into hope, a woman who refused to let circumstances define her destiny, just someone who got tired of being told what she couldn't do and decided to prove what she could. The angels might fall, but some of us learn to fly. Not because we're stronger or braver or more talented than anyone else, but because we're stubborn enough to keep flapping our wings even when the ground looks closer than the sky, even when everyone says falling is inevitable, even when we're not sure we remember what flying feels like anymore. So if this story touched something in you, share it. Not for me, but for someone else who needs to know they're not alone in their struggle, who needs to hear that ordinary people do extraordinary things every single day. Subscribe to hear more stories like this, because the world is full of people fighting quiet battles with loud courage, and their voices deserve to be heard. Their struggles deserve to be witnessed. Their victories deserve to be celebrated. We rise not because the world lifts us, but because we learn to lift ourselves. We rise because we're tired of falling. We rise because someone we love needs us to, or because we finally realize that we ourselves are worth fighting for. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's everything. Sometimes all you need is flour, sugar, and the audacity to believe you deserve better than what you've been given. The rest is just showing up every day and doing the work, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, until one day you look around and realize you built something beautiful from nothing but determination and dawn.